I'd like to go back and talk about my life experiences and what happened and how that can be meaningful for everyone that's listening to this audience today. In the early 1990s, my wife at the time, Kaye, came to me after a lifetime of illness and asked me to allow her to die. I've been through a lot of experiences, life and death experiences as a Marine pilot in Vietnam, and growing up in a very large family, and so I've had a lot of experiences with health, wellness, and death, and etc. in my life. But that was something that I simply didn't know how to face. When she was an infant, doctors in the United States took cobalt, which is highly radioactive, and irradiated her thymus gland to reduce inflammation. There were 500,000 people that this happened to, and virtually all of them are deceased at this point in time. And over 10,000 doctors died of radiation poisoning of this. The destruction of her thymus meant that she couldn't produce T cells. This was destroying her life. It'd be like being on chemotherapy your whole lifetime. We had tried everything, the homeopathic medicine, herbal medicine, we tried Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, virtually everything that we could get our hands on, and none of these worked. I had a friend that I was in business with that I didn't know had 2 PhDs. One of them was as a naturopathic doctor. He'd studied in Europe. And very quickly he got around to asking me if we tried colostrum. Now, I grew up on a ranch and a farm, and I knew that the animals, if they did not get colostrum, that first feeding, from the very first food of life, within hours, literally within 8 hours after birth, that they would die. Now, humans, we get some of our immune processes that take place inside the womb, but all other mammals do not. And so it seemed to make sense that if colostrum could save the life of every other mammal and could start and create the immune function and normalize and make that immune function strong enough to fight off every pathogen that was coming down the pike, then it had to have some ability to help my wife. We found when I first brought colostrum home, I was getting it from my friend. He was drying it, getting it from a local dairy farmer, and drying in his kitchen of all places because it wasn't commercially available. We couldn't go down to the health food store and buy colostrum at that time. You couldn't get it from New Image. It didn't exist. And so colostrum was a very rare and precious commodity. Kaye wasn't really keen on the idea of taking the colostrum. Kaye tripped, fell. She had a massive amount of cartilage tear in her left knee, and so she said, okay, I'll take your dang stuff, thinking it might help her knee, but not thinking that it was going to help her immune function at all. The next morning, we got up, and she walked into the kitchen. She'd taken off the cast, she'd taken and left the crutches by the side of the bed, and had forgotten all about them. And she walked into the kitchen on her own power, without help, without pain, and I turned to her and I said, Kaye, what's going on? And she pulled up her nightgown and looked at her leg, and the swelling, all of the black and blue, all the hematoma was gone, and she was back into an amazing process that if this could do that overnight, if it could reduce that inflammation and get rid of the pain overnight, then maybe this might help her immune problems also. I'm a very curious person. I had to find out if this would help others. I had to find out what the scientific background of colostrum was. And so we were looking for some answers to that, and I knew the only way that we were going to find this is if I could get into a medical school library, and if I could work online in PubMed. And this was a time before internet was available in homes or businesses. It was only available through the military and through medical schools and universities. I went over to the gym that morning to work out, and I had a young lady come over and talk to me, and she had told me that she had been inspired. She was a very, very spiritual person, and she had been inspired to come up and talk to me because her husband had allergies so seriously. They had hives all over his body, all down the inside of him. He couldn't eat anything besides water. And I sent her home with a gift of some colostrum just to try it out. And within a day and a half, all of his allergies and hives cleared up, and he was able to be well, to eat, to wear clothes, to go back to work. And she was so grateful because it saved their home, it saved their livelihood, that she came to me and asked me if there's anything that she could do to repay the kindness that we did in giving her some colostrum and the miracle that it worked with her husband. She said, I'm a medical researcher and I have a library card that'll give you access throughout the whole world to that scientific community through PubMed and Medline, and you can go and use my card to do that. I spent thousands and thousands of dollars personally, and I filled 4 file cabinets front to back of over 4,000 articles that I felt were critical to understand colostrum and its components, and what immunoglobulins did, and what growth factors did, and what cytokines did, what interleukin did, and what proline-rich peptides and lactoferrin, the key components in colostrum, and what the function of those were in the body. And what I found in doing this research, I found that clinicians and scientists all over the world, in New Zealand, in the United States, and in Europe, and Japan, and South America, and Germany, and Scandinavian countries, and virtually Russia, all over the world, were looking at the components of colostrum because those components were being utilized to treat infectious disease. Jonas Salk, who was the father of the polio vaccine, used bovine colostrum to successfully treat and prevent polio in humans, even though cows don't get polio. The cows are producing antibodies for polio. I also hired a medical anthropologist. The top medical anthropologist in the world is Dr. Heinemann. He's had written about 50 books on medical history. And I asked him to go back in and look at colostrum and the human use of it. And he went back and he was able to document that the first animal that we ever domesticated was called an auroch, and it was a cow. And we didn't have to kill the cow in order to get the food. We could milk the cow and drink the milk. And what we didn't know at that time is that every pathogen, virus, and bacteria that the cow came into contact immediately produced antibodies so that it produced a living, walking pharmaceutical. It was a store for us. It was instant vaccinations. The ancient Egyptians used colostrum for treating burns, for immune factors, for treating infection, for broken bones, for anti-aging. Cleopatra bathed in a colostrum and milk combination of honey. And the history of colostrum's use throughout India, through recorded history, was so important that here's a nation of vegetarians that revered colostrum and the benefits that it obtained out of this for the immune suppressed and the young and the older people in their society. For 4,000 years, colostrum was a true super food. Why we did this, Kaye and I sat down and gathered this information and put it together, is because no one in the world had done this. We had to share that information, that it was critical that we bring this information back again into the wealth of human knowledge. We felt that it had been lost. So the old adage of the sicker you get, the older you get, the older you get, the sicker you get, goes hand in hand with this process, and it's mostly environmental. These aren't gene-driven diseases. These are diseases that are driven because of what we do to our body and what we put into it, that requires us to take something and get back into starting to create homeostasis. It's a big word for having our body function correctly so that we don't have a process of disease. If we got colostrum, if we got milk from our mother, if we breastfed for long enough, then we have the ability to fight off infectious disease and allergies and asthma and autoimmune diseases for a longer period most of our lives. But the reason that we need colostrum past our initial birth, we found, is because of environmental factors. Autoimmune diseases mean where our body is attacking and destroying our own living cells and organs. Cancer is an improper functioning of the immune system, and it is partially and mostly responsible because of viruses infecting and creating abnormal reactions, overgrowth of our living cells. A majority of chronic disease begins in the gastrointestinal tract, begins in the bowel. Research that we helped initiate in London and here in New Zealand proved that colostrum's growth factors could stop the permeability that's associated with the beginnings and the process of chronic disease, and was the only source of growth factors that can heal and prevent that process. Colostrum has been proven in clinical trials with athletes to increase strength and stamina up to 20%, over and above any other food source in the world. It's been proven in clinical trials to shorten the requirement for recovery from surgeries, recovery from burns, from accidents, from injuries, recovery from athletic endeavors that damage our muscle. It allows us to grow new muscle quicker and to repair it, reduce inflammation, and eliminate the pain that's associated with these, and to increase serotonin in the brain, to calm, to come into the brain processes. And there's components in colostrum that have been proven in human clinical trials to reduce the symptoms and the progression of Alzheimer's, and to help us regenerate nerve tissue that's been damaged, because Alzheimer's is an autoimmune disease where the body again is destroying our own tissue. And here's the other amazing thing we found out, is that we found that over 120 components in colostrum that are incredible, every one of these in their right, are incredibly powerful healing components. They all work together in a synergistic basis. And why wouldn't they? We've had 100 million years to develop colostrum as a species, to be perfect for us as our first food, to do all of these functions for us, and to be able to do all of these functions for us all of our life. We don't all of a sudden change after birth to become something that can't take advantage of colostrum's benefits. We can take advantage of colostrum's benefit at any age. Here's the other thing that we found. We found that the cow is a universal donor, that the components in colostrum are bioidentical to the human colostrum and the components that are in human's milk, mother's milk, and that these are components were intended to be available for us a long time throughout the process of breastfeeding. We normally, as humans, have breastfeed for a couple of years or more, and we don't do that anymore. So we need to go back in and we need to take a look at the natural processes. And the process of colostrum, if we really examine this, it contains every component that our body's immune system and our systems for health produces for perfect health. It's produced for us as a mammal, as mammalian biologics. You cannot obtain these components from plants. You cannot obtain them from fungi. You cannot obtain them from mushrooms. You can't get these components from any other source in the world except from our own species. And colostrum is the true superfood, or something else would have been the very first food of your life. So it only made sense to us when we started looking at that from that standpoint, that as the very first food it did all these wonderful things and can continue to do it. But we also, I think it made sense to Kaye and I to realize, and to all of the doctors and scientists that we introduced this science to, over 10,000 doctors in the United States use colostrum on a consistent basis with their patients today because of the information that we've shared with them and are sharing with you tonight. And colostrum is truly a very miracle substance, and a miracle substance of life, the beginning food of our life.